Hey guys, it's Vince with Green Joe Coffee Truck, and I am answering generator questions for a dear friend of mine that had taken my coffee truck crash course. And there's a generator questions. I get a lot of generator questions. It's probably one of the top questions I get, that and espresso machines. And I went, so the course I cover this in depth is know your equipment. That's where I cover all my recommended equipment for coffee trucks, but I break down both 220 versus 110 generators and my top 10 picks off of both. So the question she has was, hey Vince, I have all this equipment and I'm looking on running two Predator 350s or 3500 generators in parallel. Will it work? Now let's kind of break that down for each step here. So the Predator 3500 is a 110 or 120. It's same difference. A 120 volt generator that runs 3500 starting watts or peak watts. Same difference. And 3000 continuous. What that means is it can continuously pump out 3,000 or 3 kilowatts or 3,000 watts, same difference. It can put out 3,000 watts continuously all day, every day, blah, blah, blah. Every now and then, it can handle a max load of 3,500, i.e. you put on your blender, i.e. you put on your espresso grinder, a 10-second shot of power, okay? So it can handle up to 3,500, but it's not made to handle continuously 3,500. So its continuous wattage is 3,000 watts. And what in parallel means is when you run your generators in such a way that you double the wattage. So they have what's called parallel kits, where you plug you put your generators right next to each other, and basically you put for lack of better terms, a jumper cable in between your generators. It's not a real jumper cable, it's a parallel kit. But essentially what you're doing is transferring power down the line to double your wattage, not your voltage. That's in series, and you can't do that with generators as far as I know. If there's any electricians out there, feel free to correct me. But you can do in series with battery power. That's pretty simple. But generator power, doubling your voltage, I've never heard of anyone being able to do that. From what I understand, it has something to do with the grounding, but it's above my pay grade. So, all right, so in parallel means that you run them right next to each other, you double your amount of wattage. So what she did is she sent me all of her equipment with the wattage and asked me if this will work. Now, this is someone who's been through my crash course. They've put a lot of money into my business. I got no problem answering questions like this for them because they're right about to get started. It's getting hectic for them. It's down to the wire, right? Some of you guys out there never bought my ebook, never bought any of my courses. You're going to send me these questions. You got to get to the back of the line, man. There's a lot of these questions for me to answer. So, loyalties in mind. She sent me this wattage, and she said, is this going to work? So the first thing I did is I broke down her equipment by what's continuous, meaning what's going to be on all the time, like your refrigerator, and what's peak or what's not going to be on all the time. All right. And so for the continuous wattage, I got her fridge, and she sent it to me at 470 watts. I just rounded that up to 500. When it comes to wattage, I tend to round high. It's kind of like profits. You round your profits low, right? You always expect you make a little bit less than what you think you're going to make. So for the fridge, I did 500 watts. For the espresso machine, she gave me 2,300 watts. For the coffee brewer, 1,700 watts. Now, coffee brewers are on and off, but during your peak hours, during the 3-4 hours from, let's just say, 7 in the morning to 11 or 12 noon, that thing's running nonstop, especially on your busy days. So even though theoretically that thing would be considered something that would be on and off, this is just where experience comes in. I know that during my busy times, festivals, weddings, whatever, that thing's on nonstop. I'm constantly tending to it. So I'm going to call that a continuous appliance, a continuous piece of equipment. So I put that at 1700. She's got some LED lights and some basic like POS system stuff. I put that at 100 watts, not much. So right there, that's 4,600 watts. And then we have the water heater. And the water heater is a great question because it just kind of depends on what kind of water heater you have. So I have, if you go to my Green Joe coffee truck, on my resource page, I show the water heaters that I use. And I like the Bosch water heater. I prefer the 2.5 gallon, but some of your codes require 4. Anyhow, what I like about this thing is it has a switch where you can put it on a max setting, you can put it on a minimum setting. So you don't have to draw continuously the amount of juice that water heater maxes out at. Nor really would you. You would do that in the beginning of your shift, but then it's going to have kind of a trickle effect. So the water heater, theoretically, it's a continuous use, but for the water heater that I use, I turn it on in the beginning of the shift and then I put it on its minimum setting. And to be honest with you, I don't know what that minimum setting is, the wattage pull from that minimum setting, but I know it's not using the full amount of wattage that it has, which we have the water heater down at 1440. So I know that that's not going to draw 1440 continuously. But if your water heater does draw continuous usage, and that's why I wanted to put it in the continuous usage category, some of your water heaters will, and you'll have to put that as your continuous usage in your continuous usage list. So anyways, if it were to draw continuously, it would put her at 6,000 watts. She wants to run 2 3,000 watt generators, for lack of better terms, because even though it's 3,500 watt generator, it's a 3,000 continuous use generator. So we're doing the equation on continuous usage. So she wants to run 2 3,000 continuous use generators, which is 6,000 watts. Well, if your hot water heater is continuous use, that puts you at 6,000 watts, and you haven't turned on your espresso grinder yet. So that water heater is going to be in one of the defining pieces of this equation. I wanted to point that out. If you can, if you can turn it off during your shift and just turn it on in the beginning so that you have hot water, bring it up to 150, 160, whatever, where it's, hot to touch. That's the same temperature as steaming milk, right? We bring it up where it's hot to touch. Most codes only require your hot water to be at 110. And you typically only lose 10 degrees Fahrenheit per hour. So you can make it through a 5-hour shift starting at 160 degrees. We just know that from running tests on the truck. We just thermometer probes and testing it along the way and just trying to be slightly scientific about this method. Anyways, so what I do is I turn my hot water heater on in the beginning of my shift. Before even my espresso machine. When I first get in and start making coffee, I turn the hot water heater on, bring it up to temp where it's burning my hand when I turn on the hot water faucet. If it's burning my hand, I know I'm close to 160 because that's what my hand burns when I'm steaming milk. So once I'm up there, then I just bring it down to its minimum setting and let it coast. Cool. If you do that, then you're going to have enough juice on those parallels. If you don't do that, then you're not going to have enough juice. So that the water heater is the defining piece of equipment in this equation. Now that we've calculated the continuous use, let's move on to the peak wattage. The peak wattage in this is the espresso grinder, which you turn on for 10 seconds, 20 seconds at a time. The blender, which is pretty much the same thing. And the coffee grinder, if she wants to use one. She was mentioning that she has a Bun coffee grinder at 1,300 watts. So the espresso grinder is 300 watts. The blender can be up to 1,400 watts depending on what you use. So of the two, rarely do I run both at the same time. Typically in my workflow, I grind an espresso shot, I pull a shot, I use the shot to put in my Frappuccino, and then I blend the Frappuccino. So my workflow does not have both pieces of equipment running at the same time. Some of your workflows will. You'll use things like I see a lot of people use like Big Train, these like, kind of powdered Frappuccino mixes, and they'll use their blender for that. If you're using that product, then yeah, you greatly run into the possibility of using both of those at the same time. In which case, your peak wattage is going to be close to, we got you at 1700. So then, if you have that water heater as your continuous 6,000, that would be a total of 6,000 watts. If you have the water heater at max power in your continuous equation, and then you add 1700, you're going to be pushing 1770, which is above the 7,000 wattage usage of your parallel generators. So, okay, and now, all right. So now I'm going to add more to this equation than it really needs to be, because that's what I do, is complicate things. Looking at your inlet, she sent me some pictures of how she feeds her panel, and you can set up your panel to feed either on 120 or 240. It looks like your inlet, for those of you that are not familiar with inlets, they're the exact opposite of an outlet. It's the male prongs. And typically on the food truck, you have an inlet under a weather lid. You just flip it up and you plug your generator cord into the inlet, because your generator cord is a female plug. You plug that into the inlet, and then the inlet feeds your breaker panel. That's one way of setting it up. But so your inlet looks like it's a 240, like a 240, 250 inlet, which means your panel probably is set up to take 240 power. So if you can go back and do some rewiring and set this thing up for 110, you perfectly well can, but it appears to me that the panel is set up to 240, and trying to get 110 generators to plug into a 240 inlet is going to be disappointing. It won't feed it because it's only giving half the power it's supposed to. So, ultimately, would I use, not could I, but would I, right? Can you use it? Yeah, I think you can. It's going to be a little tricky. You'll have to do a little bit of a dance with your hot water heater. You'll have to be cautious on what peak equipment you can use. But I think you could probably pull it off. Would I pull it off? That's where I probably wouldn't. And this is why. Because Predator generators at my Harbor Freight run $850 a piece. So, you're putting what, $1,700 into it? And for $1,000, $700 less, you can get yourself like a Westinghouse 7,000 watt that has a peak power of 8,500, and that runs 240 power. Or you can get even more. I mean, you can get a 9,000 watt. They're a little bit louder, but again, I have videos on how to buffer sound. And with that route, what you would be doing, one, you won't have to fix any of the wiring off of that panel, which is great. But two, you're also opening yourself to the possibility of a 220 espresso machine later on without having to go back and repurchase equipment. If you decide to go with the 110 Predator generators, and I'm not saying they're bad generators, they're probably my favorite for 110s. If you do decide to go with the 110 generators, and you find that your smaller espresso machine cannot handle the volume, which if you take off is a very high possibility, then not only will you have to go back and repurchase your 220 espresso machine, you will also have to repurchase your generators as well, and any wiring that you set up to make that panel work for you. So it's going to be an added expense in the long run. And personally, this is just my preference. I like to stack things up for my long-term game, because the way I think about things is if you continuously kind of stack things up for the long run, eventually your stars are going to align and you'll get ahead, right? So I'm kind of thinking, all right, well, Can I pull it off? Sure, you can. Would it be a lot easier and cheaper to just get, you know, a Westinghouse or a Champion generator that has a 7,000, 8,000 continuous, 9,000 peak? Probably. It's going to be cheaper. It'll be a little easier to do. And then I would just look on ways of mitigating the sound. Things like, you know, the buffering panels that we created in one of our videos, or, you know, possibly a muffler, those type of things. So anyways, that's my take on it. Kind of a long video, 15 into it, but yeah, I thought I'd put that out there. Hey, if you guys are interested, Green Joe Coffee Truck, I have an ebook that I sell on the website on how to build coffee trucks. I have business plans and courses that just show everything from how to calculate cost, the different what equipment to purchase, navigating code and regulation. You'll find that all on the website, greenjoecoffeetruck.com. My name is Vince. Thanks for checking me out.